Okay, so I'm Peter Tribble. I'm not a computer person by training. I did physics at university. I did theoretical astrophysics. I sort of did that in Oxford. I did it in Toronto. I did it in Cambridge. With a sort of young family and bills to pay and sort of the like. It wasn't necessarily a sort of good career option. So I'd been looking after sort of computers in the various departments I'd worked in for years, and so I sort of decided to get paid for it rather than sort of doing it for free. So I turned into a sysadmin, although looking through my sort of pile of certificates, they don't actually mention much about being a sysadmin, but there is something about sort of being a fully qualified DBA, which I'm glad that I immediately burnt and sort of forgot about. And, our company does actually use the database that I'm qualified in and doesn't have a DBA, and they shouldn't find out. And I just tinker with technology. Sometimes old technology, sort of Meccano. Think Meccano rather than sort of modern stuff. So, my career, I've been a systems administrator since the late 80s. I spent many years pointing out bugs in Solaris, and it had a few. And eventually they decided that rather than release the product and then sort of have 100-odd bug reports come in, they'd let me try it first. This went all the way through Solaris 2.6, 7, 8, 9, Solaris 10, which was a fairly major change. About that time, Sun created the OpenSolaris project, which is great. Take an operating system, sort of buy out the licenses from all the license holders. They've spent several $100 million, I think, in total to buy out all the rights, and open sourced it. And I helped open source it in the first place. Was part of the project for a long time. Eventually got voted onto the governing board on about the day that it was sold to Oracle.
Good time.
At which point you realise that sort of not only was this the governing board up to that point just a sort of a pretty face that sort of Sun used to sort of justify the project, but Oracle then never spoke to us. Nobody from Oracle ever spoke to the governing board. They never answered the phone. They never said us anything. They never told us anything. So after a little while, we sort of said, "Okay, you got told to us. We're going to shut the project down." And they still haven't talked to us in all the years since. So that was a great success. You have to say. But once you've released code into the open, it stays open. The license holder, as Oracle have, can take their source and close it. They have that right. But they can't close the stuff that they've let out. So OpenSolaris got transformed into illumos, which is the OpenSolaris code base, and that's carried on ever since. What's important about illumos, the same things about sort of Solaris historically. ZFS, if you're storing data and you care about it, then ZFS is pretty much the only game in town. Object stores tend to have integrity elsewhere. Dtrace, zones for lightweight virtualization is very strict on standards, much stricter than a lot of the code that you have to compile, sort of which plays fast and loose. It has decades of heritage. I still have binaries that I was using in the mid-80s that still run. And I use them every day. Phil Harmon called this thing Solarishness. It's just a general attitude of correctness and sort of doing things right and properly rather than sort of just because it's convenient. And we aren't infested by some of the more modern changes. We have lots of our own crosses to bear, of course, but so that isn't one of them. Some of these features, of course, are available in other fine operating systems. The whole point of having these parts of the operating system open source is that other people can take them. FreeBSD in particular has picked up quite a lot of them. Over time, we've built up quite a collection of distributions based on illumos. Sun created an OpenSolaris, just to confuse the naming, OpenSolaris was the project, and there was an OpenSolaris distribution which had nothing to do with the project. It was produced internally within Sun, sort of against the wishes of the OpenSolaris community. You can see it goes back. Open Indiana is a project, it's based in London actually, that was designed to take that distribution and just carry it forward, you know, with exactly the same basis, exactly the same build system, exactly the same rules, exactly the same look and feel, just to carry it forward. Omnios from OmniTI in the States is a server-focused distribution, sort of fully supported. You know, you want a support contract for this, you can go and give them money. Joyent, fairly important cloud provider, produced SmartOS, which is just a hypervisor. There's lots and lots of storage vendors use illumos or the OpenSolaris code base in some cases under the hood, primarily to do ZFS, of course. You know, sort of, but there's quite a lot. Sort of, Delphix are a database company. Nexenta have an awful lot of the world's storage under their control. There's quite a lot of other small companies. Not all of them survived. Then there's then there's quite a few more actually. There's a very, very long list of odd distributions, most of which are fairly small. There's DevOps and OS Dyson are actually Debian focused. One is true OpenSolaris illumos that happens to use Deb and APT for packaging. OS Dyson is true Debian with an illumos kernel. You know, there was a Debian sort of K OpenSolaris, which that's carried on. And same way you can put FreeBSD under Debian. Yeah, so it's exactly the same sort of philosophy. There's quite a few other small fry, including something called Tribblix. How do these distributions differ? Well, in the same way that sort of there's a whole range of Linux distributions for various purposes. Yeah, sort of one of the key differences is packaging. Sun railroaded something called IPS, what they call the image packaging system through. That's how they built the OpenSolaris distribution. That's how Open Indiana, that's what Open Indiana uses, that's what Omnios uses. Extremos, which is a small commercial distribution, uses it. Traditional SVR4 packaging, as used in legacy Solaris, is used in something called OpenSXCE, which is another one-man effort, and it's used in Tribblix because I'm lazy. Delos and OS Dyson use Debian for packaging. Joyent with SmartOS use package source. Of course, if you're running an appliance like the storage vendors, I have no idea what they do underneath. They just build a binary blob, and if you think of the number of available packaging systems, you think, well, where's the RPM-based distro?
Far, far, far away from me, hopefully.
And the answer is there isn't one. Sort of Belinix, which comes out of Bangalore, was going to switch from SVR4 to RPM, but they never actually released anything, which is sort of odd because you look at we cover all the others. In terms of hardware support, pretty much everything supports sort of basic Intel x86 hardware. You'd think this being based on Solaris that sort of it would all support Spark. Actually, no. OpenSXCE has supported Spark all along, just about. And now Tribblix supports Spark, because I thought it was a bright idea. And, SmartOS is only 64-bit. The reason, of course, because Joyent produced SmartOS. They run a cloud, so they know that every single machine in their data centers is 64-bit. They don't have 32-bit to worry about, so they just toss the 32-bit stuff. One interesting thing is that sort of if you're running a sort of IPS really chews memory. You need well over a gig of RAM just to install a package. It's one reason. The other ones are happy in 5.12. I'm trying to push that down because I know somebody has tried to install it on an old Spark box that's got 256 meg and won't take any more. And
we've got a Netra sat in the office that I'm pondering trying to reinstall at some point.
Yeah, I think this is an Ultra 5 or something he's got. It's same.
Does ZFS not get upset?
No. I think I've run, sort of standard install with ZFS and a desktop, X, Java, Firefox. Well, Firefox until you browse to the second page, sort of. On ZFS, it's quite happy and fine. It adapts, but
FreeBSD with ZFS doesn't even finish installing if you are under a gig of RAM.
Yeah, it's not quite as integrated with the rest of the memory subsystem as it is on Solaris. So they'll get there. It's getting better even on BSD. I mean, so I've got a 1 gig laptop with FreeBSD on ZFS root, and that's fine. That's reasonably current. The thing about ZFS is it will use as much memory as it can, and it will give it back if it's asked to. The problem is that other clients asking for memory have to ask for memory and wait, rather than just bailing out and straight away. So it depends how aggressive the what the application's failure mode is, sort of, in terms of how. But more memory, the better. Generally, it's a general rule. Okay, right. So I've covered some of this. This is sort of the mentality of what the distributions, how they sort of see themselves, or how I've interpreted how they see themselves. Because Open Indiana doesn't have a mission statement or an elevator pitch or a function or any use whatsoever. I keep suggesting that they do have one, but they don't.
Just what's the license for illumos? Is it still the
CDDL?
Yeah.
And it says Oracle on it, because we can't change that. So the license allows us to use it, but we can't take Oracle's copyright off it. So the licensing is fine, but it's copyrighted.
How compatible is the CDDL, so BSD and
BSD fine, GPL3 sort of depends who you talk to. GPL2 no way.
So you can't include, which way around is it? Is it you can't include GPL stuff in the CDDL, or is it the other way around?
GPL will not allow you to add CDDL stuff.
No.
CDL it's like Mozilla, it's a permissive license. So CDL was quite happy with anything. But the problem is on the GPL side. The GPL side will not allow you to sort of link the CDDL stuff in, because you'd have to change the license.
It's the same sort of problem as the old BSD license, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where you have a very permissive license, but there's some sort of minor clause that's incompatible with GPL.
Yeah. So you can, for instance, ZFS on Linux is CDDL'd because it's based on OpenZFS. You can build it on Linux, you can ship it with Linux, it can't go into the kernel, it can't go into mainline. And you have to have this separation of, it's an external module in the same way that some of the other binary drivers are for Linux. So that's okay. So Open Indiana is copying OpenSolaris, warts and all. Omnios, that's pure server, fully supported. OpenSXE wants to be like Solaris 10, was and stay that way. Extremos wants to be a very, very modern version of Open Indiana. SmartOS is the hypervisor. Tribblix is what I think OpenSolaris should have been all along. So the real question is, given that there's actually already quite a few distributions, why on earth would anybody be so stupid as to write their own? It's sort of fun. Yeah. I come from an academic background. I like playing with things. I like tinkering with things. That's why I got involved in the project in the first place. It's challenging and interesting. It also means that you have to learn and understand how this thing works internally. There's an awful lot of black magic goes on inside sort of a distribution. Quite a lot of the distributions are actually just built on top of another one, and just use the standard tools that say basically they're a variant of a parent distribution. You run the distribution construction toolkit, give it a different set of parameters, it spits things out. I don't do any of that. I wrote my own. I don't have to worry about anybody else as a target audience. I really don't care. It's nice that other people use it. It's nice that they submit bugs and enhancement requests. But really, I don't have to ask anybody's permission to make a change. If I want something, I can do it. Great. I also wanted to build something that allowed me to mess around with things and build something completely different. It's partly got there. Oh, and some of the other distros I didn't like. And if anybody hasn't got the idea yet, this IPS packaging system that Sun and Oracle have got, I think it's rubbish. I hate it. You won't catch me using that. So what values do I have? Okay, so the key word here is retro. That's the key word. It's very much retro. Where possible, I use modern components. So the styling might be retro, I might have old ways of doing things, but I'm going to be using absolutely up-to-date components to do it. For instance, I go for lightweight window managers, traditional, not these modern, fully functional, all singing, all dancing desktops like GNOME and KDEs are not too bad, although building is sort of a pain. But I like lightweight window managers. I use SVR4 packaging, although part of that is just plain laziness. I know how it works. In the day job, I have a reasonable amount of tooling that I've developed. It's very easy. I go for lightweight and fast, so I can run this on smaller systems. Although I don't have all that many systems that are all that small anymore. And I like things that are really, really simple, and that you press the button and it just works. Because I'm lazy. I really don't want to be bothered with sort of things that are complicated and horrible and require lots of manual effort just to sort of do the simple things. So where are we now? On x86, it's pretty mature. That's true of illumos as a whole, actually, because almost everybody else on illumos is running x86. So in terms of the kernel and user land, it's pretty mature on x86. On Spark, that's a work in progress, very much so. I do have an installable ISO that will run on sort of the vast majority of modern-ish Spark hardware. So the stuff that Oracle are selling now, it won't run on because that's all closed hardware and they don't let the specs out and they don't have the source code to modern drivers. But you go back sort of 2 or 3 years and machines back then fine, and all the way back to any of their 64-bit hardware. Should just work, although quite a lot of it hasn't been tested for a while. I'm not aware that anybody in the illumos community has one of the sort of E10Ks or the 25K big sort of machines the size of this room that Sun produce. The build process is nice and solid in the sense that, so I can sort of type a couple of commands, produce, so build the thing, get the ISO, and it usually works every time I do it. Not always, but if you're not breaking it occasionally, then you're not actually sort of pushing it far enough. And it's at the state where I can actually sort of do some further little experiments. I've been working on this. It's based on a lot of ideas that I had at the start of the OpenSolaris project. So we did the OpenSolaris project, tried to push various things through. Then, of course, there was the governing board and the Oracle acquisition and burnout and sort of the like. So didn't actually get around to actually sort of producing something independent until about sort of 2.5 years ago. And sort of I set a bunch of things, sort of called milestones. I'll come off those. So I've now done 14 more releases. Basically built 14 more ISOs with more features. That's a release every couple of months, which isn't too bad. I would have liked to have gone faster. Some of these milestones. Well, the first milestone is produce something that boots. This took most of the summer of 2012, actually. Starting with a set of files that constitute the kernel and nothing else, attempting to actually build something that would boot, sort of took some time, because the boot isn't really documented at all. Reverse engineering sort of the installer and the way that OpenSolaris built the ISO and the boot archive and sort of the way that sort of Grub and ZFS interact. Not to mention the odd sort of interesting bug in VirtualBox, because of course, so it's much easier just to sort of build an ISO, put in VirtualBox at it, see what happens, try it, build another one. Things like sort of being self-hosting, being able to build illumos on your own, be able to build yourself on yourself, so it carries on. Having a functional desktop, that's not been too much of a problem. Originally, Solaris 10 and OpenSolaris use GCC 3. That's getting a bit old now. So I updated to GCC 4. That didn't go too well the first time I tried it. And then things like creating a sort of network-based installer, rather than sort of having to go down and certainly in sort of our data center. Half the machines I buy don't have CD drives. If there's an option of not having a media drive on it, I'll take that. Less power, less things to go wrong, less cost. Created that. Things like updating OpenSSL. Well, it turns out that's a really painful thing to do because it's intertwined with the illumos itself in nasty ways. So actually upgrading OpenSSL is hard work. I'm glad I actually did it because it turns out that there are good reasons for upgrading OpenSSL that have come out recently. I got most of that sort of sorted out before I actually was forced into it by things like Heartbleed. Supporting Spark, which actually I did sort of just before Christmas, and that was another key milestone that I actually wanted to get done. There are benefits to having something that's cross-platform. It teases out a whole lot of assumptions that you make about how things work. But how did I actually do this? Well, what I actually did was take OpenIndiana, because it's got the thing about OpenIndiana, I know that it works on the hardware or VirtualBox that I'm using. So I know that I have a system that if I take that ISO and shove it and present it to something, it will boot and install and work. So if I could take exactly those those binary files and persuade that, use that to build a system that will actually boot and run and install correctly, then that's, then in other words, I don't have to worry about whether I've built the kernel correctly. I know the kernel works because it comes from somewhere else. Conversed it into SU.4 packages, installed them into a directory, sort of laid everything out on the disk, tried creating a bootable ISO. The way that the OpenSolaris ISO works is just bizarre. It's very interesting, it's very sophisticated, it's almost entirely undocumented, and very few people know how it works. Because nobody was able to explain to me how it worked. And then sort of basically the way that this works is you type things in by hand the first time. It if it works, then okay, that's good. That gets cut and pasted into the sort of the build or the install script, and you just keep building it up as you go along. And then once you've got something that works, you can then start replacing subsystems with things that I've built myself. So you replace, you know, the kernel with your own built out of illumos, the way that you want. For Spark, the only way I had was OpenSXE is the only other thing that will boot on a Spark box. So I had to start with that as a bootable environment and then go through the steps again. And of course the Spark boot mechanism is completely different from that on x86. There's no grub, there's no nothing. You're deep inside fourth microcode that sort of gets loaded into the prob from the boot device. It's interesting. This is a one-man show, and it's done in my spare time. So, is it actually sensible to think you can actually do this and actually make the project work? Remember that I'm doing this from scratch. I'm not just taking say Ubuntu and producing a variant of Ubuntu. I'm taking a bunch of binaries and creating a distribution and installer and boot system completely from scratch. In my copious spare time, sort of in the evenings and unpaid. My initial guess was that, so there's about 12 critical milestones that I needed to get through. That wasn't too bad. I say the GCC 3 to GCC 4 was a complete disaster, and I had to rebuild everything back with GCC 3 and then try and upgrade again. For some reason, GCC doesn't correctly build itself unless you really, really sort of poke it hard. So that wasn't too bad. I'll say I'm pretty much done in terms of meeting the initial objectives. When I initially added up the hours I thought it would take, again, that wasn't too far off. But my estimate of how much time I'd actually have, sort of free time to work on this, was a little bit optimistic. A bit of illness, and then sort of people kept pulling me aside, saying, "Oh, it would be really nice if we supported LibreOffice to illumos," so you get sidetracked. So it took a bit longer than I expected, but it's not too bad. Okay, bit on this live CD. Actually, Belenix out of Bangalore wrote this completely, and then Sun stole it for OpenSolaris and Solaris, and there is no credit given whatsoever to the people in Bangalore who wrote all this. But basically all it is you have an archive of the root file system, which is loaded as a RAM disk, and then the /user file system is actually an ISO image that is also pulled in separately, because you don't want this initial RAM disk to be too big. And then there's a bit of scripting that glues these various bits together, and you have to have bits of /user in the RAM disk in order to be able to mount /user later on. Joint have it easy. Joint just have one huge great RAM disk that they boot off a USB stick or off PXE. That's all they do. But they know it works on their hardware, and they just have a minimally sort of constructed system that has exactly what they need and nothing more. And the installer, well, that's actually very simple. So you boot this thing up into a reasonably functional state. So you've got /user from a file, you've got the rest of the system as a RAM disk, glue the two together. You simply copy that to the destination. And then you remove all the glue that stuck it all together, and then you can add any additional software that you desire. I was starting with SVR4 packaging. SVR4 packaging, if you've used Solaris, is primitive. But it was familiar, sort of, I do Solaris in the day job. And it's actually easy to use, even if it is a bit primitive. And one of the great advantages of it, from my perspective, is that everything in it is actually text files. So if necessary, I can go behind the scenes and muck around with sort of sed and awk and fixed packaging without actually invoking the packaging tools, which is a lot easier than sort of anything that's got an embedded database or that has some Perl, Python, or whatever dump. And all I did was I stuck either wget or curl for downloads, and so you put packages on FTP site, on a HTTP site somewhere, stick a text file that's got a list of packages, and that's it. But I don't actually want to do package administration. I mean, who cares about packages? There's almost no case where one package represents a useful unit of work. So I define things I called overlays, and there's other reasons behind this, but basically words clusters and groups were already taken, so I had to find another word that sort of described a larger unit of functionality. And inside those any individual package, that's just an implementation artifact. The idea is actually build the system. If you remember the talk about Docker, it's the same concept, sort of only it's been how I've built systems for the last 10 years. You take a base system and you just layer things on it until you get the functionality you want. In terms of desktops, the primary desktop is XFCE. I've been maintaining XFCE for Solaris and OpenSolaris and illumos for donkey's years, so it works pretty well. It works extremely well. It is consciously portable between platforms. It doesn't. They've avoided any sort of hard-coded dependency on anything that's come into Linux. That's hard. It's actually been a struggle for them, but it works out of the box on BSD, and I just needed one patch because they didn't quite get the power management right for illumos. So that's why, and that's also the desktop I use all the time for pretty much everything. We ported Enlightenment, another old sort of desktop. Originally, sort of Enlightenment 0. I'm not quite sure what their naming scheme is, because it was very simple when they released 0.17, because it was Enlightenment E17 at version 0.17, and now they're calling it Enlightenment E17, but the version is 0.19, so I'm not quite sure how their naming scheme works.
I thought it was E19.
Well, yes, we all call it E19, but you read the website, it says E17 on it.
I know,
I wouldn't consider the website to be authoritative.
Yes, they've changed all the other words.
I don't think they've updated the website to say the right version.
Yeah.
Yes, it was very confusing when
It was E18 when I was last looking at it, and there's still had E17 on there.
But anyway, yeah. So I just call it E19 because I call the unit. So that's got ported. That's actually stuck at that point. And this is going to stay stuck for a while. We're sort of a few minor releases back now, because current versions require absolutely current versions of Xorg and supporting libraries, and I haven't updated those yet. And there's lots of others. Window Maker, Afterstep, IceWM, OpenBox, Fluxbox, things like TWM, TBWM, BTWM, PyWM. I mean, somebody sort of emailed me one day and said, "Can we get CDE working on illumos?" The answer was yes, but that was downside harder work. CDE comes from legacy Solaris, right? You'd think it would just work. Well, no. However, the people who ported it to Linux have done, basically, in fact, when you look at the source for CDE, there's a block at the top that says, if Linux, FreeBSD, NetBSD, OpenBSD, Dragonfly, blah blah. Use modern code, else use some 1980s crap code. So basically the fix was an automated sort of search and replace that went through if-def Linux, add Solaris to that, because we know that we're modern, right? I mean, this source code is very, very old. Okay, and then you fix up the very much smaller number of cases where the if-def Linux is actually something that's Linux specific, and there isn't much because this is old code, so it hasn't picked up any of the modern Linuxisms. It's a partial port. I think they've finished it now. To the point, I think I got all the tools working, but not the login manager. And I could only run one tool at once. But I think they fixed that. Yeah, so. And then I go back to things like the old Ardent window manager. We took X11 release 3 or X11 release 2, yeah, sort of. The sorts of things I remember using when I first used Sonos 3 on a Sun 3 box, sort of back in the university days. And then, amazingly, all this stuff still works and is still reasonably useful. It seems a bit washed out. But just as proof, that's XFCE running on this week's release. It just works. Enlightenment, E19, again, pretty much just works. There's one or two odd things that don't work. And one of the things I actually need to do, and this is true of most of the window managers actually, is to go through the all the configuration and the options and the menus and actually put in something that's relevant rather than sort of something that has some list of Linux specific tools from 10 years ago, which most of the window managers have, is they have sort of odd selection of Linux tools from years and years gone by. Moving away from the desktop to something like zones and virtualization, if you think about, these aren't all hypervisors of course, but the general virtualization, on Big Iron you've got physical domains, so you can actually take a large box and physically partition it into multiple boxes. I don't think illumos will be interesting in that sort of environment. So if you can afford one of those boxes, you can probably afford to pay the tax of a commercial operating system. There's regular hypervisors, sort of logical domains on Spark, VMware, things like Xen and KVM. There's various flavors of zones, so IPS has a zone flavor, there's whole root zones, there's things like containers, Docker, Rocket in the middle, sparse root zones, there's rump kernels down the bottom. I'm interested in this sort of area here, sort of taking some of these modern container ideas.
What is a rump kernel?
It's a standalone, it's basically take an entire operating system, kernel and all, and your application, and build it into a single binary file that you then boot.
Right.
Either on bare metal or more commonly on another hypervisor like Xen or the cloud. But basically it's a minimalist operating system, so it will just have the drivers you need, the components of libc that you actually call down in a single file. So you can actually boot this thing as an operating system, but it's just got the one application inside it. It's very, very lightweight. So, hello world in a rump kernel is much smaller than libc because it doesn't have all these other bits that are there just to support other applications that might happen to exist. It's very interesting technology. It's very modern, but I say it's cutting everything down. Very, very limited. I've run Solaris zones in production for a decade. And zones can actually sort of meet a lot of these needs, but what we don't have is tooling, to be honest. We have the functionality, we have the kernel, that's the same as sort of the sort of C groups and the sort of Linux kernel components. We have a couple of commands. Actually, sort of everything under that is actually a bunch of shell scripts. If you install a zone, it just calls a shell script that runs a whole bunch of install commands. That's all it does. So you can actually replace that. And you can actually write your own. So I say IPS has one, SmartOS have a whole bunch. And I've been actually writing my own. So rather than use the standard Solaris base zone creation scripts, I wrote my own. The old ones used to call the SVR4 packaging commands in order to create a zone. I said they're just text files, right? So you can just do a shell one-liner and build a zone in about 2 seconds. This is easy, right? Ha! Like hell it was. Illumos is a right pain to build. The default build environment is Open Indiana as of some considerable time ago. It has very fragile dependencies with the host it's built on. Actually getting around that, I actually build a custom zone that has exactly the right components in it so that it will build perfectly each time. OpenSSL, again, has this horribly interconnected set of dependencies with the kernel, or with the whole build. And I won't even mention the auto tools, which do not work most of the time. They are not tools, they are do no auto. And where are we? I think I've almost got to the stage of saying, okay, my initial objectives are done. We can call something 1.0. I need to get Spark brought up. I need to bring everything. Need to sort of get rid of this odd bits of other distributions that I've imported. I've learned a huge amount about how these things work and how just to sort of build things. And every time I look around, sort of I still find some interesting things that I can look at and work on, and other sort of things like Docker. That's a really interesting way of thinking about building systems, and you can apply a lot of that too. And that's actually going to be a major focus. Things like zones, application deployment, thinking along the same way as Docker, or the AppC spec for Rocket. Might be a slightly easier way of doing things than try and re-implement Docker, which doesn't have a... Illumos itself is moving. There's lots of development ZFS, standards, missing Cruft. Joyent are pushing away in a couple of features, but we're short-handed. I mean, I'm doing my stuff on my own. There aren't that many other people working on it. I got 1 second left. That's all right. Fragmentation's a problem. Pretty much all the work is done at the distro level. There isn't, so what happens is Joyent and the like, they go and add stuff to their stuff, and then they might upstream it to Illumos for everybody else to use. Or you have to go and cherry pick their commits and apply them to your tree and hope that nothing else has changed in the meantime. And there's not much work on Spark. I'm not quite sure how much longer I'll be able to work on it, because Spark, you need Spark hardware to get this to work, and it's not that common.
So you're having to heat your house.
The thing is, you've got 128 cores, 128 threads on my boxes. So I've got 4 of them, so that's about 500 watts each. When my daughter comes home from university in the summer, she's going to find a very warm room. So if you're interested, that's where to go. Some interesting places to read, and thank you very much.
Thank you. So we take a break, and then we're going to have the presentations in the other room. Just remember, if you want and don't want your gift, please give them to me. And if you don't want to give it to him, give it to me. Actually, I have to get chased around here. I have one question.
Yep.
Given what you know now about this entire thing, would you do it again?
Actually, yes. Yes, I would. I would hope to be able to do it much more efficiently in an organised manner.